Alright, we're running back the list that I used for the month-end event. See, it still isn't fantastic. I think we have to mulligan 2-5. So I didn't really feel like I did this list justice for what it's capable of. There were a number of play mistakes during the event, and a couple things people pointed out in the comments and such. Even mistakes that I missed as I was playing the deck. So I wanted to run it back. Listening to the creator of the original variant of Irrigated Lotus Field Control, game 1, the deck is more akin to a Tron deck than it is traditional blue-white. So you're not really looking to go into, like, you know, counterspell on 2, interact on 3, maybe wrath on 4, then just, you know, kind of play the normal blue-white control game, at least game 1. Game 2 and game 3, you have a lot more, like, tailored hate cards, like, you know, Dovin's Veto, Ether Gust, you know, those kind of things. You're a little bit less dependent on setting up the ramp as quickly as possible, whereas this variant is much more set up with the thought process of Lotus Field on 3, either Discontinuity or Strict Proctor, and then untap with 5, maybe 6 mana to work with, and then maybe slam with Teferi. So this hand is about as good as you can get. Put back Dream Trawler and lay down arms because we don't actually have a plains to speak of. I'll play Castle first. So Castle first, Boseiju second, Sylvan Scrying for Lotus Field, and then Discontinuity. Of course, we're about to get Thoughtseize Duressed, so, you know. Let's play this instead and pass. We're likely up against Lotus Field. Nope. Yeah, still might be Lotus Field, I guess. So, match that I did lose to in that event. Okay, so we shock in this, try to buy ourselves a turn. Either holding up a Boseiju or cycling Spara's headquarters here. If our opponent does in fact have a or not a Mixless Greasefang to slam here. This continuity looks a little bit weak. So obviously if we'd kept lay down arms we could deal with this Rafine's Informant, but so they did have the mana to play Greasefang this turn. Doesn't mean they didn't have it, though. sure to stop here. One of the things on Arena, you got to make sure that you set the stop. I guess we've gotten lucky that they haven't found an... Sure. That said, we still need to find a good payoff. Yeah, that doesn't really qualify as a good payoff per se. And scry here, but we're just dead unless they only attack with Chariot for some reason. So if I play Lotus Field, we're just dead on board because of the way the mana... Well, I guess we sack these two. I'm going to attack with 6 mana, 7, 8, 9. Continue to hold up Besage You here. Yep, mulligan to 5, got our Sylvan Scrying taken, and then just kind of punted from there. With the third copy of Farewell, Ether Gust only really hits Chariot. Hits some of the spells. Exile non-creature, non-land cards from the players. Don't know if we want Thought Distortion or not. Shark Typhoon might be able to go. That was a bit slow. Temporary Lockdown hits some things, but not lots. Problem is, I don't think we have a lot of room for stuff to bring in, so... And still kind of has the same problem. So, mulligan. The only reason we're keeping this hand is the ability to settle the wreckage on turn 3. Or turn 4, I mean. Which may not be good enough, but... Yep, salvage. They find a Besage You, perhaps. Which is exactly what they take. Like, if they spend their turn Besaging our land here. Opponent was nice enough to provide us with a basic 2 target, which that's kind of unusual in the Greasefang decks. Okay, I think we shock in Teferi. Question is, what am I pitching here? Okay, the Greasefang, sure. Okay. There's salvage, yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm. Sure. Alright, let's see if our opponent decides to Yep. Unfortunately, the Liliana Ultimate's going to get us a little bit here. Definitely sacrificed their own pile. Well. Didn't matter anyway. The scene isn't... It's good, but it isn't ideal because of the lack of a discontinuity or a strict proctor, but I still think we keep it. It's like angels, perhaps. Yep. Still one more turn to draw Strict Proctor or a Discontinuity. Just to buy ourselves some time. Sure, collect company resolves. Okay, pass. Of course, they have a second collected company here. Why would they shock in there? Okay. Is it like a Skyclave apparition? Nope, Kellinghazard Construction. Sure. Curious to see what my opponent chooses to play around here. Oh. Mm-hmm. Alright. Her opponent concedes, sure. If we want Farewell. Probably, I think that's about the only card we want is Farewell. Temporary Lockdown's middling, but okay against them. I think the cuts between Shark Typhoon and Revelation. You need the early interaction. It's kind of unique that we're playing against, ironically, the two decks I lost to in the showcase, not the showcase challenge, the end of the month arena event there. So. Cards they're generally bringing in, you know, any type of anti-control stuff. So Redain, any type of grindy effects. And they like to bring in like Shaper's Sanctuary, which isn't that good. Decathley's Welcome, Reckoner Bankbuster, etc. Green White Angels is pretty well situated against like mid-range decks, like red-white, or not, against Rakdos mid-range, but isn't as good against decks with sweepers. Tends to struggle really into go over the top decks like blue-white control, 5-color Enigmatic Fires, just anything that has just enough early game to keep from getting run over, and then good top decks. Not to say they can't win, especially if they have like Invasion of Gabaton into like Redain into some other disruption. They can certainly survive long enough and then just kill us. So. Lay Down Arms is certainly a unique card in this build, but I think it's just interactive enough in the early turns. Like it can kill an early mana dork, it can kill You know, say on turn 2, sometimes you can kill like a Giada, etc. Like, it's just enough early interaction to kind of keep you in the game along with March while you're doing those early setup turns. Especially since a lot of your hands, especially in the pre-war games, you're doing nothing effectively until turn 3, other than maybe casting a Sylvan Scrying or something. Sylvan Scrying is a trade-off, right? Like, you get the guaranteed Lotus Field or the guaranteed Boseiju or the guaranteed Thespian stage in the early game, and, you know, maybe a utility land like a Boseiju or an Otherworldly in the mid game, versus, you know, Impulse or something like that a lot of the versions run. You know, giving you better card selection, looking for a bomb in the mid to late game. So there is a trade-off to playing Sylvan Scrying over something like Impulse. I think it improves your consistency at finding your land part of your thing, but disimproves your consistency in the mid game if you're not finding your thing. And not surprised, a lot of people don't like playing against this deck. It can be annoying to play against, but yeah. Figured it was an interesting rematch against a deck that I lost to, and a little bit of explanation about why I like this particular version of the deck and why I settled on it for the event. Alright. Wow, this is kind of one of the trap hands. You have one land Strict Proctor. We'll keep it for science, but this is like one of the gamble hands that why some of the versions play 27 or 28 lands. We get a little bit lucky that we draw one of our 3 non-Lotus Field. And we're up against Keruga Fires, which pound for pound the decks are kind of comparable. But Keruga Fires has real problems against the card. I should not have played that this turn, by the way. Keruga Fires has problems with a card. Farewell. So. Okay. Get your 4th land into Fires. Okay, you have Fires. What's your payoff? Okay. This is where this deck gets a little bit stupid as to what it's capable of. Down. Okay. Good way to finish off Teferi. Drop. So Hellish Norn, sure. Settle the Wreckage to Teferi. For either Discontinuity or Farewell there. My positive is they really don't get to... I mean, yeah, they get to draw a lot of cards here. But they also don't get much out of this because their deck doesn't actually run a lot of basics usually. They might run a few. Nope. No basics whatsoever. They run Agent here? Of course they do. So I can't do everything I want to do this turn. Have a second copy of Otherworldly to go get anyway, so just run this out. If I had a way to like recoup our out of water, we could get back our Teferi, but we don't, so. We have an instant speed? Oh, of course, they line binding, sure. Mm-hmm. One, two, three, four. Sure. Mm-hmm. So 6. Deluge might actually be a better option here. Discontinuity. Memory Deluge. So 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Only need 10 mana to do what I want to do. So Memory Deluge and Seiju. 6 mana. Go ahead and discontinuity here. Memory Deluge. Doesn't help you against exile, friend. I mean, technically this is the correct play from our opponent, but I guess outside of like leyline binding into nonsense. Unfortunately, that's both of our main deck copies of Farewell, so... Aggressive Giant's fine. Deluge. Still looking for a Teferi to tuck our Teferi. There's Teferi, and there's Discontinuity. Oh, yeah. We lose to freaking Kenrith. Got it. Definitely want the Feast of Guests. Definitely want Farewell. Thought Distortion's kind of okay. Dylan's Vita's also kind of okay. Temporary Lockdown does pretty much nothing. Yeah, Arms does close to nothing. Try like that. This hand is just not quite good enough. This hand's fine. Put back that and the Wandering Emperor and Otherworldly, I guess. Okay, they have a Fable, sure. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sure. Get a 5-drop. Hey, by the way, that was a mistake. Mystical Dispute. holding these in case they have like Leyline Binder or something. Okay. Yup. Yeah, never never get Hellish Norn against our deck. It literally does nothing. It stifles the trigger from Lotus Field. None of the rest of our stuff has ETB effects. We're not running Leyline Binding. Just don't get Hellish Norn against our deck. I mean, yes, it sets up their deck quite nicely, which is, I guess, is the main reason to get it, but... Okay, so... It's possible we're supposed to shave on like a Settle the Wreckage or something, but... This hand doesn't have the other half the combo, so we have to mulligan. This hand just doesn't do anything. Looks like we're going to... Nope. Sure. Yeah, fires. Touch the spirit realm. Sure. Yep. Yeah, 5 mana. That was dumb. I should not have played my land drop. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Sure. Opponent pitching an incarnation. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Four mana, so shouldered maybe? Either shouldered or Heliod. Yep. Okay. Okay. Memory Deluge. Not the most interesting version of her draws there, but can't let a leyline binding resolve. Teferi down. Interesting. Figured you'd fight over that with Touch of the Spirit Realm. 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. Fortunately, that's going to resolve. Mm-hmm. So they missed lethal here unless they have Bone Crusher Giant. What?
I was just mimicking the cards.
Hmm.
The one card that says, I know what must be done.
Gotcha. There's ironically not a whole lot for them to get down there in that graveyard, and they could have gotten a Brazen Burrower back. They did miss lethal last turn though. If they would have played Brazen Burrower before they gave her everything haste. Okay, gets to shuffle up their hand a little bit. they'd drawn a third Mystical Dispute, this could get a little ugly. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm really gonna die to this nonsense. Yep, we die just having one too few mana. Good place for a mark opponent. They managed the match really well. Alright, back with a quick wrap with Blue-White Lotus Field again. I guess technically Bant with this variant. Lost to Greasefang, which is kind of the expected result against that style of deck. Beat Angels, largely because they just gave up on the match. And then played a very interesting set of games against Enigmatic Fires, a deck that I do think this deck is pretty decently favored against. But our opponent did play their deck quite well, utilizing things like Touch of the Spirit Realm, Brazen Borrower, and then ultimately the thing that did us in was a Cavalier of Thorns on our Dream Trawler, allowing them to get through the last couple of points of damage. But they did play, you know, to their outs well, not overcommitting to something like Farewell. So it was an interesting matchup, or an interesting gameplay back and forth, and props to our opponent, even though we were like one mana away from doing everything we wanted to do. So maybe if I'd played that Lotus Field a turn earlier or somewhere in there, we may have actually won that match, but you know, I digress. As far as why I liked this variant over the other variants going into testing, I really like the idea of having some number of Sylvan Scrying over a card like Impulse. Increases your chances of having the Lotus Field in your opening hand. I really love to find a way to get a fourth copy in here, but I don't really know outside of like Sphinx's Rev what you would consider cutting for it. But you know, just to increase the consistency of our opening hands, having a Lotus Field or copy of Lotus Field. For those of you who don't know how the combo in quotes works, either Strict Proctor or Discontinuity on the turn you play Lotus Field allows you to not have to sacrifice lands, basically. You never play Strict Proctor until turn 3, generally speaking, just in case your opponent has, you know, removal that otherwise is pretty useless against your deck. You know, things like Fatal Pushes, etc. So you play this on turn 3, you play the Lotus Field immediately thereafter. Even if they kill it, the trigger's already on the stack. You don't sack any lands, and then you untap with 5, possibly 6 mana on turn 4. And then you start doing nonsensical things like Farewell, or Teferi, or Discontinuity, and just kind of disrupting your opponent from there. Beyond that, you have a little bit of early interaction in the form of Lay Down Arms and March of Otherworldly Light, kind of giving you a turn 1 or turn 2 play while you're waiting to do the setup. Temporary Lockdown, kind of important against the early aggression creatures like spirits and humans. But a lot of other matchups, it's kind of a dead card, giving you a little bit of flexibility on things to cut. And then, you know, Settle the Wreckage, Wandering Ember, Memory Deluge, Discontinuity all give you a plethora of things to do if you're untapping Teferi with, or untapping multiple Lotus Fields with Teferi. And then Sphinx's Revelation is kind of your go-over-the-top card. Obviously, Teferi, very powerful in this deck with, you know, multiple Lotus Fields, starts netting you a bunch of mana. Kind of becomes like a build your own wilderness reclamation deck in some ways. The other nice thing about the green splash over blue, just straight blue-white, is you have access to things like Boseiju, in addition to Otherworldly, as ways to deal with just random permanents, whether it be enchantments, artifacts, etc. Just having that as a nice out. And then, the rest of the deck, or land base, you have a couple of bullet lands, you have some cycling lands, and Irrigated Farmland, and Sparta's Headquarters, you have a couple of Boseijus and Otherworldly, you have a Hall of the Storm Giants, one of each of the 2 castles, and then a 1-of planes, so you're somewhat vulnerable to something like Field of Ruin, but you at least have 1 land to find. Sideboard so far, I haven't messed with it yet, and given how many matches I have been playing, I probably should be if I'm going to continue working on the deck. Ether Gust is quite important against mono red aggro, against mono green, those kind of decks, just to buy you, once again, pairing with your Laydown Arms and March Otherworldly Light. Narset's Reversal, this is a card that, in theory, should be very good. Copying your opponent's counterspell, copying your opponent's Storm the Festival, copying your opponent's, random big instant or sorcery. I think this would be a little bit more important in the format if actual Lotus Field combo was a viable deck yet, but without Hidden Strings, that deck's still a little bit of ways away from being what it is in Pioneer. Thought Distortion, this card's good. Blue-white control, maybe you could consider bringing in against Greasefang. I just think it's a little slow for what you're trying to do with it. Dovin's Veto is when you just need a hard counterspell. Of course, doesn't answer everything, as we found just losing to Cavalier of Thorns. Unlicensed Hearse, a little bit of graveyard hate for Greasefang, eventually as a Phoenix. Chrome Shark, it makes baby sharks. But all joking aside, you do need an alternative win con sometimes, and this is one of the cheaper ones, and kind of does a pseudo Shark Typhoon imitation. The 3rd copy of Farewell is just a wonderful card in a lot of matchups, especially against anything mid-range or basically mid-range. Can also bring in against the aggressive decks as yet another sweeper. Helps clean house against Incarnation, against Rakdos Sack, against red-white, or against Rakdos mid-range. Anything that's trying to be a little bit grindier and play to the board that's not heavy of planeswalkers, this card's quite good. And then Hullbreaker Horror just feels like one of the better win cons against control and such. You could try something like Niv-Mizzet, Dragonlord Dramoka, which is one of the main cards in the sideboard, and a lot of these decks is not available yet in Explorer. So another card you can consider maybe with this build would be Zakama, but I think that one might be a little bit far-fetched. Those of you that don't know, Lotus Field combo, the deck often boards out the combo part of their deck and then becomes this weird Zakama control deck, and that's kind of like where I got the idea of Zakama maybe a thing. As far as the deck's issues, fast combo, so Greasefang, to a certain degree, Lotus Field combo, especially game 1. While it's not entirely a deck, it is possible to build it on Arena at this point. You just don't have the hidden strings, so you're playing things like Hope Tender and such. And then another card that's problematic is a Resolved Hullbreaker Horror, which your only real card against defense against is Discontinuity. And then a lot of the other things is just a little bit of consistency issues with the deck because of the nature of you're not quite blue-white control. You're kind of this hybrid ramp deck / control deck, so you really need Lotus Field or Sylvan Scrying in your opening hand. So you're going to be mulliganing a little bit more aggressively, almost as if you were like a blue-white X Tron deck instead. But yeah, there are some slots I would probably start messing with in the sideboard. The Narset's Reversals I might tweak out or tweak with. The win cons I might tweak a little bit, but could potentially shave down to like 2 Ether Gusts. Like, a lot of times when I want to bring in Ether Gust, I find it's easy to bring in the first two. The third one's a little bit more difficult. So if I'm going to continue working on this deck a little bit, which I might because I've actually kind of enjoyed it, I might shave down like a copy of this and then tweak the sideboard. As far as the main deck, I think the main deck is, once again, quite good. The only card I would consider shaving is, you know, maybe the Shark Typhoon, maybe the Sphinx's Rev, one of those two to get the fourth copy of Sylvan Scrying in here. Yes, it does kind of narrow down your win cons, but in the end, I think maximizing your ability to hit Lotus Field is important. And I don't know that you can afford to give up any of the early interaction. You could even conceivably run a 61st card just to get the Sylvan Scrying in there. I might even try that. I'm not usually a big fan of 61 cards, at least pre-board configuration. But it might be something worth tweaking to see if I can get that in there, and then start tweaking with the sideboard a little bit. The reason I decided to run this in the event, as opposed to a lot of the other decks, I think Mono Green is far and away the best deck in the format, or at least the best deck that has a chance against almost everything. The problem is I really didn't want to run it into Mono Green mirrors, so it's kind of why I rolled Mono Green out. Some of the other decks, like Greasefang, Rakdos Midrange, Rakdos Sack, I was having a little bit of issues with their consistency, and then when I would try to play Mono White Humans in best of 3, I tend to get smacked around a little bit, so I was trying to find a deck that I tried tweaking with the build of Lotus Field combo that's currently available, and I just had a few too many consistency issues with it without hidden strings, having to rely on creatures surviving instead. So I'm like, well, they're Lotus Field Control, let's see if we find any versions that I actually like. Kind of ran into this one, liked what it was doing overall. Had an okay matchup against Mono Green, had an okay matchup against the aggro decks. It has a few weaknesses, you know, Greasefang combo's a little bit too fast. That was one matchup that I was kind of willing to let go. And then I obviously lost to Green White Angels in that event. Probably shouldn't have due to some play mistakes, mostly involving the interaction of Strict Proctor and Temporary Lockdown. But I digress. That is why we settled on Lotus Field. Figured we'd give it another chance to kind of show itself to have a better performance than when I was playing at my worst during the event. And I think, you know, these 3 matchups were pretty good. Even though we went 1-2, I do think that matchup against UWg Fires was a lot of fun. My opponent seemed to know their deck very, very well. All the little tricks of the trade with their deck. So instant speed stuff does get a lot of the sorcery speed stuff in this deck a little bit with, you know, the farewells and such. With really only discontinuity being your, like, kind of emergency button in a lot of situations against those decks. So, anywho, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Hope to see you for our next video.